This is going to be a video about The Witcher 3. So The Witcher 3 is one of my favorite games from the PS4 generation, right? PS4, Xbox One generation. I love the dialogue, the setting, right? The different upgrades, the customization, inventory, the side missions, the questing, all those things. So let's start off now, like The Witcher 3 and the questing, right? Now, lots of quests, tons of quests, side quests, main quest, right? Some Witcher 3 has a side mission system similar to Skyrim, although not as big, but some side quests can get very interesting and very, intriguing. So, lots of questing, exploration, right? The questing kind of involve you going to see like a person, and the person asking you for help, and you are a witcher, so you are like a monster hunter. You are a monster hunter. You know about traps, monsters, and you have superhuman senses, right? So you can sniff out monsters from a kilometer away, etc. Right? Other types of quests that involve you trying to solve like a murder, right? Solve a murder through your witcher senses. Other ones may involve right races, so you can do a horse races, right? A fist fighting, Gwent, right? So Gwent, which is like the card game, etc. So lots of different side quests, and the questing, as you get further and further into the game, each quest is gonna have a certain level of requirement. So level, for example, level 7, level 22, level 30, and the more, obviously, the more you play, the higher at the level you get. Playing through it, so going through the game, the more so the side quests, they really give you a lot of. The side quest will give you a lot of XP, right? Early on. No, sorry, the main quest. The main quest that will give you a lot of XP. So if you play through the story early on a lot, you'll get a lot of XP. And through those XP, you get more upgrades. You get access to more powerful armor, more powerful swords, spells, potions, etc. Speaking of the main quest, right? So the main quest. So this one has you looking for Ciri, right? As you may know or know, right? The game has been out for 10 years, but Ciri, you're going around looking for Ciri, and Ciri is like, kind of like your daughter, but she's very powerful. She has Elden blood, the Elder blood in her, and which makes her very powerful. Now the story, which is basically that, you're going around looking for clues as to where Ciri is, and the story, the main quest is very long. It goes very, very, very long. There is a lot of dialogue, right? So if you're not into those dialogue heavy games, this game is gonna be like a burden for you, right? It's gonna be, but if you're into it though, there's lots of great dialogue. It's kind of like you're watching an episode like a Game of Thrones, right? So learning the politics, between Redania and Nilfgaard, and the witch hunters and the sorcerers, right? It can get very deep, and the dialogue is very brilliant here. In terms of the voice acting is amazing. The voice acting is top notch, one of the best in the in the industry. Speaking, so many accents in the game are British, Irish, kind of, French, German, Eastern European, and lots of different accents. The Witcher. So the story of The Witcher 3 is very big. It is very long. My favorite part of The Witcher, 3, right? Really, in one of my favorite parts about it is certain decisions. So certain decisions you make in certain dialogue option moments will dictate the outcome of certain quest. There's not a lot of decision based moments, but when they are right, they can get very special and can get very intense. There are some moments in the game, right? So similar to if you play Beyond Two Souls, The Heavy Rain, Detroit Become Human, in that there's only probably like 7 seconds to make a decision, and this decision can be very crucial to certain moments. Now the story can get the story does kind of drag a little bit, because it does kind of get a repetitive. Okay, looking for Ciri, and it's like, can we finally resolve this already? Can we finally find her? And it does kind of get a little repetitive, and does drag a little bit. But however, right, because each lead and each clue as to where Ciri is, so involves a certain kind of person or a certain faction, right? And I really get to understand other people's motivations. For example, at the Baron and his family, he has a history as well. Yennefer, Skellige, right? There's a whole kind of faction there, and they have their own thing going on. So looking for Ciri involves you kind of intertwining with a lot of these different factions, and it gets very, very interesting. Also, as well, with the game, upgrade, lots of swords. So lots of swords, tons of swords. Certain swords are rare. Some swords are relics. Other swords are common. Others are uncommon. And the more rare swords that you get, at the higher level they are, right? So in terms of damage, efficiency, etc. Playing through the game, you get armor sets. So the armor sets, right, attached at a certain stats. So certain higher stats, right? So the higher, the more rare an armor set is, the more armor it's gonna give you. You can craft armor sets. You can craft swords via materials. You can use alchemy to craft potions, and you are a witcher. So a witcher has a very high, has a very high immunity to toxins and poisons. But eventually, if you use too many potions at once, you will die. So the toxic levels will go very high, and there's a certain potion it's called a thunderbolt. I believe it's called a thunderbolt potion, which basically cures you of all the toxins and toxicity. So lots of stuff there, and tons of alchemy, lots of alchemy items, hundreds of alchemy items, and whether it be plants or liquids, chemicals, etc., flowers, etc. As you play further and further in the game, there's merchants, tons of different merchants I had to talk to, and these merchants early on, right? Some areas can be very pricey, right? The economy in some areas can be very pricey. In terms of the coins you have, there's different types of currency in the game. There's orens, there's crowns, etc. But the different types of currency, you can convert them into something else. You can convert them into the main type of currency. So it is best, in terms of the merchants, you can find a merchant and to buy food, and food is important for health, right? Or you can use a merchant, right? Whether it be certain merchants specialize in, for example, making armor, right? Like a blacksmith, and they can craft armor sets for you, assuming you have the right, ingredients, crafting of materials. It is best, not to buy armor sets or swords because they will cost quite a bit. You can go. There's question marks throughout the map, so lots of exploration. Kind of similar, not on the scale of Skyrim, but kind of similar in terms of lots of kind of exploration. So you can explore these question marks on the map, and the question marks, they give you certain clues. So the question marks, you loot like a certain kind of, you gotta a fight through bandits or kind of drowners, and I'm gonna talk about enemies after. You will loot these special chests to find rare swords. So you don't have to buy swords because they're gonna cost a lot. Speaking of enemies in the game, tons of enemies, and the Witcher is very monster deep in terms of its lore. Lots of monsters, from fiends to ancient vampires to drowners to werewolves to enemy. There's also kind of there's like a Doppler, which is like a shapeshifter. So the Doppler is like I think it's like a midget, but it can shapeshift. No, sorry, it's like a dwarf, but it can shapeshift into like literally any kind of being or any human, I believe. There's other ones too. It's called a succubus. Is like this giant. There's another one. It's like a giant kind of a tarantula, arachnid-looking thing. So lots of enemies in the game, and through the enemies of the game, there's a bestiary list. So the bestiary list, which gives you kind of like a list of all the different beasts throughout the Witcher lore. So the Witcher is a monster hunter, right? You being a Witcher, and some enemies are going to be very high level, so you got to really prepare, and you can't fight these enemies until you get to that higher level. For example, a fiend. A fiend is kind of like this. I don't know what it is. It's like a deer, kind of mutated deer-looking, werewolf-looking creature, and it is a very big, a very giant, and some of them are like level 30, 35. So you gotta really level up how to fight this enemy. The enemies will have certain weaknesses to them. For example, I think it's the elemental. I think the elemental rock beast or whatever. The elemental, for some of them are weakened out of fire, so if you use fire against them. Or other enemies, for example, there's like a wraith. A wraith is weak to kind of like a magic barrier, so you can lay down barriers in the floor, and they can be weakened to that. And the further and further you play, the more kind of monsters you face, and the more the higher your bestiary list gets, the more beast you discover. So more and more throughout the game you can use. So you also have signs. You can also use magic, like I said before. You can use fire, right? So there's like a fire. You can use mind. There's like a mind kind of a manipulation, so you can make a mind control certain enemies. You can use a delusion, right? So you're trying to bribe back a merchant and bribe him to give you at the right price, or let's say if somebody is threatening you, you can use a mind control, right? There's a wind attack, right? So you use wind to break down certain barriers, attack certain enemies. There's a shield. There's a shield, and there is the magic barrier, I believe. I can't remember. It's Yigni or Yard. I can't remember what it's called. So you upgrade these signs, and you get better and better overall. You get more efficient, and the really important one for me is a shield, because a shield, you will take a lot of damage, and certain enemy attacks have heavy attacks, so parrying or blocking is more difficult, so you gotta use the shield kind of barrier, which is pretty useful. Fire too as well. I use fire a lot. Fire for like against vampires, or if it's a droner, or if it's like a water hag, use fire. And but I tell you, man, that the monster lore in this game is so deep, and the Witcher lore, right? So speaking of the lore, I don't know much about the lore of the Witcher. The Witcher, has so many books, and obviously the TV shows and the previous, two games on it, right? Witcher 1 and Witcher 2. But the lore of the game is so deep, and the lore is very, very, very deep, right? So, and as I said before, the factions, Redania, Nilfgaard, and the sorcerers, the lodge, I believe it's called, right? Like of sorcerers, and you have you have characters like Dijkstra, Roach, other characters, Whoreson. So lots of characters in the game, which adds to the lore even more. As I said before, the dialogue, as I said, it's gonna be a determining factor, right? So the game has been out for so many years now, but if you're not into like dialogue heavy, or kind of like medieval kind of fantasy heavy, or a Viking fantasy heavy games, this is not gonna be for you. But like dialogue heavy, why? If you're into those dialogue heavy moments, I recommend it. Playing through more and more of The Witcher. There's DLCs as well, so the a default game alone is big. The default game is huge, massive, lots of stuff to do. So the DLCs, there's like a vampire DLC, which is Blood and Wine, and there's another DLC involving, I think it's like a magician or some sort of sorceress, but a sorcerer. Sorry. So there's two different DLCs, which is like these DLCs alone can be like their own games. So yeah, that is The Witcher 3. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.